Salutations. In my last fireside, I broke down the history of neoconservatism and how this ideology is hostile to an existence of a multipolar geopolitical context, predominantly growing from Russia and China, and how it has evolved to fit within our contemporary sociocultural landscape. The thesis indicates that neoconservatism is no longer a racially and religiously homogenous domain, but also now presents itself as racially and sexually inclusive, geared towards anti-authoritarianism and anarchism, attempting to achieve the same ends of the Bush Doctrine, upholding the unipolar dominance of the Anglosphere. These are nations directly and indirectly associated with the United States and the United Kingdom, of making the world, quote-unquote, safe for democracy. But instead of it being wrapped in the ideology of nationalism and the American flag, it is now wrapped in the ideology of social justice and human rights. As we currently exist in the late stage of America's unipolar dominance, a divergence within the public has occurred. On one side of the spectrum exists the alt-right, more or less the new Evangelical Right, although they have some similarities with the old Evangelical Right of the Bush era. But anyhow, they uphold the American empire, openly promote white racism, segregation, and postulate conspiracy theories that do not embrace dialectical and historical materialism. On the opposite side of the spectrum exists Antifa, or what I term the Evangelical Left, which does not recognize the validity of the United States, calls for the abolition of all the police, abolition of all borders, both domestically and internationally, and condemns every trace of what they perceive to be white supremacy, and postulates critical race theory, which also does not embrace dialectical and historical materialism. It's all superstructural. Both ends of this polarity are extremely problematic, sowing the seeds of reactionary tendencies that foster racial divisions and turn the public against itself. Both ends of the polarity serve the interests of big capital, Wall Street, Davos. Both ends of the polarity are opposed to Russia and China. Both ends of the polarity wish to topple the Syrian and the Iranian regimes either in the name of America's glory or in the name of human rights. And both ends of the polarity have declared a cultural war on the citizens of the Republic, which rejects both hyper-traditionalism and hyper-postmodernity. We must take the middle path and combat both of these toxic tendencies, which are attempting to incite a race war instead of a class war against the bourgeois. Thus, we must wage a war on both the Evangelical Right and the Evangelical Left, which, despite being in direct opposition to each other, both work to achieve the same ends. To specifically spell out the tendencies of both evangelical groups, I will go into that. The Evangelical Right presents themselves as reactionary nationalists. Typically, they embrace Christian fundamentalism, but not always, and they invoke memories from an era that was outwardly hostile to the historically marginalized, black, indigenous people of color, LGBTQ, women. They are opposed to both petty bourgeois and proletarian concepts of intersectionality. They seek to go back to the 1950s when mainstream society was buttoned down, straight-laced, segregated, and overly hierarchical. They blame the crisis affecting the United States as a crisis of cultural values gone astray, rather than a crisis brought on by disastrous economic and social policies that foster austerity and mass privatization, economic policies which they both support but also blame for being socialist. They fail to realize that the United States of 2022 will never go back to being the United States of 1952. It is our job as Reds to intercept and frustrate any attempt that they make to radicalize people in the center into embracing racism and sexism as an answer to solve our contemporary problems. We must dilute the utterly insane conspiracy theories postulated from these circles and replace these conspiracies with dialectical and historical materialism and drown out the agents of disinformation. We must combat them in the forum of ideas and suppress their tendencies which err towards fascism. Now to discuss the evangelical left. To state plainly, the evangelical left encompasses all of those who are collectively referred to as woke or as snowflakes and SJWs. The evangelical left comprises of people who believe they're doing well to push society forward relative to racial, economic, and sexual justice. They liberally apply terms to those who don't subscribe to their mindset as white supremacists and fascists. They liberally condemn everyone who doesn't go along with their program as being supposedly backward and racist. They openly project themselves as socially virtuous, holier than thou, doesn't that sound familiar? And take offense at any minor criticism levied towards them and will make an attempt to cancel anyone who dares to do so. These types are also extremely problematic, and even more so than the evangelical right, because they enable the masses who they alienate and push away to turn to the far right instead of winning these people over into embracing socialized economic policies which would benefit the collective as a whole instead of yielding towards privatization. Let's take this case in point. The evangelical left will have no problem invading an Italian-American community, minding their own business, where no indigenous people live in, which has a Columbus statue, and they will insert their will onto that community, labeling them all as colonial settlers. And excuse me, last I checked, it was 2022, not 1622. Nobody's wearing a white wig. Nobody's saying thou and, thee. And nobody's doing that. We are no longer living in the colonial era. We are living in the postmodern era. Get it through your thick heads. They will then go through the motions of knocking down the statues of Columbus because to them, he represents white supremacy, and in so much agitating the community to the point where they believe they are making things better, when in fact, they are making things worse because they imposed their will on a community that never asked them to do so. And you know what happens? Instead of learning about the indigenous struggle, instead of learning to have solidarity with the indigenous, no, the divisions are ever so more widened, and now the Italian-American community is going to tune out and reject what should be a good thing. And I do agree, Columbus statues need to be taken down, but the Italian-American community needs to make that decision, not other people, and double down in their backwardness. What more? The evangelical left labels those who are opposed to NATO intervention in Ukraine and Syria as fascists. These are the same people. The people who are opposed to NATO intervention in Ukraine and Syria, these are the same people who were opposed to intervention in Iraq and Libya. The same people the evangelical right labeled as pinko commies 20 years ago. The evangelical left labels these people now as fascists when they're much further, and by they, I mean the evangelical left, they are much further to the right than the people who want NATO dissolved. Just like the Evangelical Right, which likes to shove their Christian fundamentalist beliefs down the public's throat, being all anti-abortion, hostile towards LGBTQ, hostile towards BIPOC, and legislate morality and shape homogenous culture through public schooling. Everything is about fighting woke culture, but nothing is about fixing our crumbling infrastructure, getting our homeless veterans and our homeless disabled off the streets and taken care of, or challenging the neoliberal economic system that is destroying our standards of living. The evangelical left does the same exact thing. They're like, no, we're not. We're so holier than thou. They're racist, sexist, misogynist, blah, 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 blah. No, shut up. Shut up. They think it's perfectly okay to shove their postmodernist beliefs down people's throats. All social constructs should be eliminated. All traditions should be eliminated. Sexuality should be fluid and open and taught to prepubescent children. If we change the way people speak, and if we remake classic movies with diverse and politically correct casting and convince the Washington football team to drop the name Redskins, look at us, we're fixing white supremacy, yay! Their performative gesturing doesn't mean a squirt of piss. The indigenous still live on the reservations without electricity, without running water, without heat, and most of them are starving. African Americans are still denied credit and mortgage insurance from the very same banks that post Black Lives Matter signs on the front of their buildings. The homeless are still homeless, and if they're white, they are still blamed for benefiting from white supremacy when they're on Skid Row living alongside homeless African Americans and homeless Latin Americans, who are all collectively bathing in their own excrement. Get it through your thick heads. Stop it. Stop it already. You're insane, you people. At this time, because the Democrats are in charge, the evangelical left are the foot soldiers of the establishment, and due to their single-minded zealotry, have created a very dangerous far-right counterculture, which is capitalizing off the cultural war and radicalizing the alienated with perverse theories postulated by David Icke and Mein Kampf. And if the evangelical left continues to label everyone who thinks otherwise to them as fascists, then most of them will turn into the very fascist menace they so fear. We, Reds, have to stop this from happening. In 2022, all reasonable and rational people are intersectional, inclusive, and they are tolerant. Get off the television, get off social media, and actually talk to your neighbors. As long as no one is a bad faith actor or legally troublesome, we should embrace all people, no matter what they look like, no matter what their abilities are, no matter what their race, their nationality, their creed, their gender, or their political beliefs. And this doctrine needs to be extended to moderate Trump supporters. Yes, most of them are quote-unquote white, but most of them also reject the disastrous presidencies of Reagan and the two Bushes. They reject this era of endless war. They reject big business, big pharma, and tech monopolies. They do believe our struggling poor should be paid a living wage. They do believe that the U.S. needs to redevelop its industrial capacity. They love their country and they love their fellow citizenry. These people are not extremists like how the liberal mainstream media demonizes them as. They don't support Richard Spencer. They aren't KKK members. They are socially moderate, rejecting extreme Christian fundamentalism exemplified during the Bush years. They have no problem with cannabis legalization. And yes, while they still support the institution of policing, they also believe that there are police who abuse their powers and should be held accountable. However, at the same time, they don't think it's normal for public schools to be teaching their kids under 12 about hypersexuality and about other socially complicated issues that should very well be discussed at home. They don't want their right to own guns to be undermined. No, well, you know how the liberals are. We'll take all the guns away. They don't want that. And they do believe in regulating immigration. Sorry, they believe in that. And you know what? Truth be told, I once had a high school teacher. His name was Joe. and his cousin, while making a trip to a junkyard, was bludgeoned from behind and murdered by an MS-13 gang member. Do you think my former teacher is willing to listen to a bunch of evangelical leftists who tell him that he is evil just for existing and that his cousin deserves to die? Hell no! Hell no! That doesn't mean my teacher is a right-wing fascist, and it's not for anyone to be calling him that. So yeah, get off his ass. They're also open-minded to listen to opinions outside of their own, as long as it is done respectfully, which the evangelical left never does. Instead, the evangelical left silences and cancels them for questioning the Democratic Party narrative. We are living in a time where we have record levels. You can hear the sirens in the background. It makes perfect sense, doesn't it? We are living in a time where we have record levels of homelessness and poverty, where the 1% used the pandemic from 2020 to 2021 to siphon $5 trillion worth of wealth from the 99%. We have a supply chain crisis. We are looking at a global food shortage. There are food plants all across the United States being blown up. They're being blown up. It's crazy. And the military-industrial complex at the same time is now attempting to drag the United States. Does it really have to happen like this? Must be a serious thing. Must be a serious thing. They're attempting to drag the United States into an unwinnable third world war with Russia and China. And yet the evangelical right makes a hissy fit about critical race theory and God not being taught in public schools, and the evangelical left makes a hissy fit about Mount Rushmore being a symbol of white supremacy and how there are not enough gender-neutral restrooms at Disney World. How about both of you go take a long walk off a short pier and piss off? Piss off! Since none of you are remotely concerned about helping our struggling citizenry who are frightened to death right now that they may not be able to provide for their children, or even worse, leave no society for their children to inherit. Both of you make things worse for our citizenry, not better. We need unity, not division. And those who seek to divide us, whether they be homogenous fascists calling themselves Proud Boys or intersectional fascists calling themselves Antifa, they are the enemies of the American proletariat. And they are the enemies of the 99%. When we took up the struggle of Occupy Wall Street 10 years ago, we took up the struggle of the 99% to make life better for everyone. Even the right-wing types who ignorantly said we were on the Soros payroll when we weren't. Those people are ready to listen to the Occupy message after 10 years, and we should reach out to them and work with them and cut off the neo-Nazi trolls who seek to mislead them down a dark path that will result in grave trouble for us all down the road. That is what the organizational left is supposed to do and should be doing. The left should not be acting as the foot soldiers of the Democratic National Committee, which only betrays their constituents time in and time out, over and over again, and has sold out to the progressive agenda to embrace the Bush doctrine after the Bush wing helped the DNC to oust Donald Trump in 2020. I don't care what these ignorant kids and these obstinate liberals say. The Bush wing is as far right can get. And so far to the right that Trump is to their left. Let's have a reminder. Let's have a reminder, folks. The Bush wing over 40 years murdered tens of millions of black and brown people in Afghanistan, Libya, Iran, Palestine, Iraq. The Bush gang left 2,000 brown and black people stranded and left to die in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina, and deployed soldiers to shoot them on sight when they were scavenging for food. They have harmed both our citizenry, domestically, and have committed genocide internationally, but somehow they're to the left of Trump. Get the fuck out of here. Get the fuck out of here. There is nothing that anyone can say otherwise. And when the rank and file of the GOP has turned against the bushwing, it's time to push them further economically to the left, since they are already moving away from neoconservatism and neoliberalism. Hello? So in closing, I said this before in my last video. In order to move forward, we must move away from the opposite ends of the polarity of the alt-right and Antifa. Move away back into the center. Embrace proletarian intersectionality and solidarity. We embrace everyone, whether they are MAGA, QAnon, BLM, Lambback, or wherever group they come from. We embrace everyone. We make everyone understand that we all share a common enemy. And it's not each other. It's not your neighbors. It's not the African American folks. It's not the trans folks. It's not all white people. No. We share a common enemy who resides on Wall Street and in Davos, Switzerland. And we utterly and completely reject both the evangelical right, who don't think this country is white and Christian enough, while simultaneously rejecting the evangelical left that thinks everyone in this country is a secret fascist on Vladimir Putin's payroll, and we drown both of them out. We drown both of them out with a massive red tsunami, getting as many people as we can, left, right, and especially in the center, no matter what their race, sexuality, religion, or ability may be. We get all of them on the same exact page as we prepare to wage a class struggle to preserve our very own lives and preserve our sovereignty from being privatized by the bourgeois. Re-embracing the 99% is the way forward. And those who believe otherwise, whether they be evangelical right or evangelical left, are the enemies of the 99%. And they must be combated in every avenue conceivable. That is all. This is Comrade Pella, signing out.